Hello, and this lecture is going to be about why the 1917 revolution broke out in February. And what we can see here is that we've got, why did the revolution break out in February 1917? The reading reference is 6.2 in Waller, and it's also something you read last topic, the end of the old order. So let's move ahead. And the first question is if a revolution occurs without revolutionaries, is it a revolution? And this kind of leads to the question of how can there be a revolution if there are no leaders? Remember, Cuban Revolution we saw needed leaders, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. The Nazis needed leaders. Surely the 1917 revolution needed leaders. Surely it did. And here's the answer. No and yes. February 1917 was spontaneous outpouring of frustration, anger, and a desire for change, and it did not really have any leaders. The October 1917 revolution, with Lenin, Trotsky, and the Bolsheviks, had them offering leadership and providing some leadership, and there was an outpouring of anger, frustration, and desire for change. We're going to look at the February 1917 revolution. So the answers to these questions, we can see that in January 1917, 145,000 people were on strike in Petrograd. Why are they on strike? They're on strike because of a lot of things going on, and they're not the only ones. On February 22nd, you'll see that there are 20,000 locked out of the Putilov Metal Works, and this just added to the people in February who were already on strike, the 58 factories which were already on strike. And as I said before, why? And I think you know from last topic if you think back for a moment. It's because of the problems. Here you can see a food line in Petrograd. Some people were even setting up beds and sleeping overnight so they could get enough food. There was constant food and fuel shortages. In February, there were rumors that there'd be new bread rationing, plus there were these already long bread lines. People were starving. It was the winter. And remember, this was all in the context of broken promises, a disastrous war, inflation, an incompetent and or an ineffective regime, and they'd seen it all before in 1905. So, in February 23rd, 1917, we have a women's march by thousands. It was on International Women's Day. They were frustrated with being exploited as workers. Remember, the unionization was not supported. Workers' rights were not important. There was the war going on, the lack of bread. They got the men to join. One story was that they went and threw snowballs and brought them out of their factories. And it was not long after that that the city fell into chaos. The protests became more and more violent. There were daily demonstrations. Here you can see some paintings that represent this. The Tsarist symbols and statues were torn down. You saw that last term with the burning of the different symbols. There were bloody scenes on both sides, to quote the readings. Over half the capital's workforce was involved in these strikes. And remember, these problems were coming because of the change in the number of wagons of grain reaching Moscow. In 1913, there were 22,000. 1917, there were 700. Remember, the population has also spiked in Moscow. It's gone in 1914 from 1.6 million to 2.0 million in 1917. So just an increase in the number of people, a tremendous decrease in the amount of food. And the people were just angry, angry, angry. And even with all this anger, it has been presented in the text that maybe the revolution could have been stopped if the Tsar had acted more rationally, more calmly, and maybe more resolutely. But he didn't, and so we have a revolution. We start to see, what you can see here is the unit. This is the unit that was the first one to mutiny. And here you can see in this image, we have a policeman being arrested by sailors and soldiers. And then here we have a change. Women are requesting help, and the soldiers are helping them out because they see in these peasant women or working women a commonality that they'd not seen in 1905. So let's take a look at the turning point that happened. The soldiers refused to shoot the protesters. This was not like in 1905 when loyal army units were brought back and they basically violently put down the workers' protests. The Volynski regiment, the one in the upper right of the picture, had mutinied, and by February 27th, 80,000 soldiers had joined the protesters, and they had their weapons with them. By February 28th, a day later, the entire Petrograd garrison of 170,000 had mutinied. So there was no stopping this now. The police could not bring things back, and there were no army units to bring things back. And here's what we can see is the quote from Redzienko at this time. He's saying, "The situation is serious. The capital is in a state of anarchy. The government is paralyzed. The transport system is broken down. The food and fuel supplies are completely disorganized. Discontent is general and on the increase. There's wild shooting in the streets." And this is from the man who's in charge of the Duma. And he is going to start taking matters in his own hands too. "Troops are firing at each other," to continue. "It's urgent that someone enjoying the confidence of the country be entrusted with the formation of a new government. There must be no delay. Hesitation is fatal." And so the Petrograd Soviet, I'll just move this up here, Redzienko sets up a provisional committee of the Duma to assume control from the Tsar, and that's the Tsar there at his rail car. The Petrograd Soviet Committee is recreated by the socialists. That's after the what's been going on before. Both are sitting in the Tauride Palace, and the Tsar's train won't move when he's attempting to come back to Moscow to install and bring back order. And in the end, he abdicates. And here is his abdication letter. None of us, I don't think, read Russian, so let's take a look at the English of the last part of the letter. And the Tsar, these are his words. "In the days of the great struggle against the foreign enemies, which for nearly 3 years have tried to enslave our fatherland, the Lord God has been pleased to send down on Russia a new heavy trial. Internal popular disturbances threaten to have a disastrous effect on the future conduct of this persistent war. The destiny of Russia, the honor of our heroic army, the welfare of the people, and the whole future of our dear fatherland demand that the war should be brought to a victorious conclusion, whatever the cost. The cruel enemy is making his last efforts, and already the hour approaches when our glorious army, together with our gallant allies, will crush him. In these decisive days, the life of Russia, we thought it our duty of conscience to facilitate for our people the closest union possible and a consolidation of all national forces for the speedy attainment of victory. In agreement with the Imperial Duma, we have thought it well to renounce the throne of the Russian Empire and to lay down the supreme power." So, the revolution of 1917 in February, was it Nicholas II's fault? Many people believe it was to some extent. Was it because of the pressures of the war brought upon Russia? Yes, I would agree it was. Is it the masses in action in an inevitable moment in history? It's definitely the masses in action. And for the Marxist historians, it is an inevitable moment in history. But one thing is agreed upon by all the historians in this case. It was one of the most leaderless, spontaneous, anonymous revolutions of all time. Now, is it a new dawn for Russia in February 1917? Or is another wind of change already blowing? And that's Lenin arriving in Russia on a train provided by the Germans, and he will bring further change to Russia in the October 1917 revolution. And that revolution does have some leaders. So to finish up, 1917 will have 2 revolutions. We've seen why the first one broke out, and the next screencast will deal with why there's another revolution.